Now, our second speaker of the evening will be Nirmala Narsimhan. She volunteers her time to the Hindu temple in Huntingdale. Nirmala has worked in areas of child protection, youth justice, and family violence as a social worker for many years. She also worked with refugees and migrants in New Zealand, retiring in 2020 to migrate to Australia to join her family. Nirmala is passionate about social justice and working with children and families from diverse backgrounds, supporting them to achieve their best potential. Nirmala is a member of many organizations promoting social justice and cultural diversity. She has much to tell us about her many roles and interests. Please welcome Nirmala. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Myra, and I thank the organizers for the opportunity to present this evening. It is an honor to be part of this group and to be able to present today. To introduce myself, my name is Nirmala Narsimhan, and I am I've basically come from New Zealand, and I've been in Melbourne for the past 6 months. My journey into this area of work started in New Zealand when I started work first coming to New Zealand as a new migrant in 1999, and then requalified as a social worker and started working in the area of child protection, youth justice, fostering, etc. And while working in the area of child protection, one of the factors that I noticed was while the law was in New Zealand, while the law was applicable to all and it is the same law that is applied, the practice when applying to migrants and refugees, there was a need for the practice to be slightly different because of the various other factors that are involved with migrants and refugees. The entire background, the cultural context, all that needs to be taken into account. And this led me to the area of domestic violence, as I was also part of the family safety team, one of the first teams to be set up as an interagency response to family violence in Hamilton, New Zealand. And within that, we formed a small group who were equally passionate in this area of working with migrants and refugees, and to have a differential response, which is more conducive to working with migrants and refugees, where we could insist, or when we could ensure the safety of the victims and make sure that the cultural context is taken into account. The cultural context, and from there started the journey of setting up the Hamilton Ethnic Women's Center, which is now one of a larger organization working with different ethnicities, and working in the area of domestic violence, also supporting women through domestic violence and making sure we empower them so that they can reach their full potential. So that's where the story started for my foray into domestic violence and the work in domestic violence. Since then, subsequently, I've also worked in other domains of social work practice, such as health, education, and finally, just before retirement, early last year, it was in working with migrants and refugees through the Red Cross. So once being in Melbourne, once, as they say, once a social worker, always a social worker. And I went to the temple, which is something which always gives me a certain amount of peace of mind. And at the temple, that Sanket Mochan, the temple, I found the different areas that they are also working in. And one of the areas was Hamtum, which is respectful relationships, working in the area of domestic violence. And I offered my voluntary service for them. So that's perspective is what I'm coming from right now, part of the Hamtum Respectful Relationships unit of the Sanket Mochan Samiti. So the topic that I'm talking about is domestic violence or family violence in ethnic communities and the strategies that can be used from an ethnic perspective, what we use within this organization. Domestic violence is basically a worldwide problem. It has no barriers of class, race, or financial status. Does not restrict itself to religion or community or nothing. There is no boundaries. It pervades everywhere. And different cultures may experience domestic violence in different ways. And with the growing ethnic community population in Australia, the statistics that are shown right now is one woman being killed every 9 days by a current or former partner. There is a urgent need to have some clear guidelines, some clear perspectives, which include cultural factors when working with migrants and refugees. When we talk of Hamtum, in Hamtum, we talk of respectful relationships, and our belief is that prevention is better than cure. And basically what we mean is that we'd like to start at the initial end itself, at the beginnings of anything, call us so that we can talk to everyone concerned, make sure that you have a safety, you know how to be safe, you know how to keep yourself safe, and you do know what is safety and what to do. One of the big differences I'd like to talk about is domestic violence and what is family violence, the difference between domestic violence and family violence. When talking about domestic violence, we are talking about a violent behavior between a current or former intimate partner relation, where one partner tries to exert power and control over the other through physical, sexual, emotional, social, verbal, spiritual, and economic abuse. And what is that when we start addressing this? When we're talking of violence issues, we're talking of start talking about it, break the silence. Don't keep quiet, talk to somebody, tell somebody, talk by spreading the awareness. And those of us who are strong, who do know what it is, spread the awareness of what is right behavior, what is right relationships, what is respect within relationships. And for those who are facing that, reach out, because there is always help available. So these are the various aspects when we talk of domestic violence. With ethnic communities, we prefer to talk of family violence because it is a broader term, as it includes domestic violence. And it is a more appropriate term for violence in ethnic communities, as it covers the extended family and kinship relations in which violence may occur. Very often in ethnic families, you will find 2-3 generations living together. And it is a norm. Living together with 2 or 3 generations is a norm. And therefore, any kind of violence erupting in this is included as part of family violence. And therefore, when dealing with ethnic communities, we feel that it's always better to talk of it as family violence instead of restricting it to domestic violence, which is intimate partner relationships. So what are the factors and the frameworks that we use when we talk of the domestic violence and how we start addressing this? Now here, when talking of this, I'm going to be giving examples of the various places where I've worked and what people have said and how people react to when challenged with violence, when challenged with their attitudes and challenged with the kind of attitudes and behavior of violence. Violence can be of all kinds. There are various ways by which people can be violent, even if they are not physically violent, talking down or not allowing the victim to contact their families or friends, or humiliating the vulnerable person, threatening them, or just verbal threats, verbal abuse. All this also forms part of violence. It is not something that is unknown, and it is not seen as, it is not to be taken as, oh, part of just normal behavior. Very often, cultural values, it seems that cultural values normalize violence. That is not acceptable in any culture. No culture allows for violence. No culture condones violence. Every culture condemns violence. But those with power will always pretend and would like to say that this is our cultural part and this is what is our culture. There is no culture which condones violence. Every culture condemns violence. One of the important factors to consider when we're talking of the factors and the framework is the time of arrival of some of the victims or some of these families. When somebody says that they have arrived in, they've been here for 3 months in this part of the world, they've left their country and just been here for 4 months, one of the first things is the fact that they do not have community connections. They do not have too many people with whom they can talk. And in many ways, the small little links that they have, the small little link that they may have is the husband's immediate family, or the wife, or a person that they may be connected to at place of work. But there is a huge fear to be able to talk. The fear keeps them silent. And silence is this silence, which also involves fear, shame, the stigma that is attached, all that being connected with that silence is why you will have generally less people reporting domestic violence from ethnic communities, less people asking for help in ethnic communities, less people wanting to talk about domestic violence in ethnic communities. I've often come across situations when I go to talk about domestic violence in ethnic communities to any particular community, and they immediately say, this does not happen in our community. That's not true. Every community has domestic violence. Every community will hide the violence under the guise of culture because it is a shame to talk about it. And what is the background of most of these, most of the migrants and refugees who come into a new country is a background of patriarchy. The family structure is patriarchal. And when the family structure is patriarchal, the man is conditioned to be the head of the family. He has that role imprinted so strongly in him that any role which is other than the head of the family he's unable to take that, unable to see it as something that in a way he's also contributing. So when people come to a new country, one of the things that we had seen in our work is that women seem to get a job sometimes very quickly. And women, when they take up a job, the role reversal takes place where the man is still looking for a job, whereas women have been able to get a job and bring in the bread, some kind of money into the family kitty. Now, with women having that financial strength and the financial ability, women start thinking, having a feeling that they have also a say in things. And that is a huge impact on a man who's been conditioned to a role of man in the family, the head of the family. And this role reversal has a huge role to play in the relationship between the male members in the family, because of the fact that the male has been trained, conditioned to be the provider. And from that starts the disturbance in the relationships. And with that comes also the fact that his role is threatened, and therefore he starts putting her down. I remember one instance where we had a family meeting to address the violence. And I told the man that he is battering his wife. And he turned around and told me, don't talk of the word battering. I am not a batterer. I have only given her 2 slaps. Now, 2 slaps or 1 slap or 15 slaps a slap or raising a hand is violence. Putting her down is violence. Not even accepting raising a hand is violence in itself, is an abuse in itself. So the attitude is, if I hit, that's the only way it is violence. Otherwise, it is not violence. The time of arrival also gives the woman, makes the woman very vulnerable, because she usually sits at home with the children, whereas a man goes out to seek a job. He may get the job, he may take up a job which keeps him outside his immediate home and is able to make connections. The woman is still isolated. She's isolated from community, isolated from her family, isolated from connecting with anybody, and that isolation leads her to be withdrawn. And with that, any abuse of any form, she lumps it. It is take it or leave it or lump it. She lumps it, mainly because of the fact she has no options. Also, one of the huge issues that we have seen in the years, 20 years of working in the area of domestic violence, is the fact that women, most of the migrants and refugees we had worked with, come from cultures that are collective cultures. And what I mean by collective cultures is the difference between a Western philosophy of individualism as against a culture or collective culture, which is everyone is important except me. My family is important, my husband is important, my child is important, and I sacrifice for everybody's sake, but I want to keep the family together so that everybody is happy. And I am not the important person. And that's a collective culture that most of the migrants come from. A collective culture thinks of others more than themselves. And whereas once you come here, you do see the individual culture where the woman is as important also. The woman has a say, and that is something that she struggles with. And so if you were to talk to a victim and say, oh, this is, you are going through violence, you need to move, you need to find a different option, it is just not going to move. She's not going to move. She's not going to accept that she needs to have a change, because it's like peeling layers after layers and layers of the onion, where she comes from the collectivism from where she comes, the collective philosophy from which she comes is threatened. That is already putting a big pressure on her. The family and the patriarchal structure puts a pressure on her. And added to that, she faces the racism in this new environment that she's come. That is another pressure on her. Her own culture, where she comes from, has roles and hierarchies where she has a particular role to play. That is threatened. And also her role as a good wife and a good mother that she has to, all that is something that is threatened. So she is unable to get out of that. The shame, if she gets out of that, which she will face, the shame that will be part of her family shame, the shame that will be extended to any other member in the family. She doesn't want to topple any of that. And so she is silent. And so she will keep bearing that. And that's where the empowerment comes in. So in working with ethnic families and ethnic women especially, one of the most important areas to look at is, how do we empower her? Use culture, to the cultural norms, to help her see she is not the cause of it, to help her see it is not her culture that is cause of it. It is the person in power who has twisted and used that to control her, to help her work through these issues. And that is what is done as part of a counseling session in the place that I am working right now, that I'm volunteering right now. As part of working, we provide some assessments, and then one of the most important part of my role is to provide that counseling to make them see differently. We have the Duluth model of one single of a power and control wheel, and we use the cultural factors of power and control in order to make women see differently, in order to see women to help women move out of this cultural constraints which are created by those in power, those who are in control, and help her to build up her own power, help her empower herself, strengthen her inner self in order to be able to stand up for herself and stop that violence. Is one of the most important parts is stop the violence. Very few will say they want to walk out of relationships, but one of the big things is to stop the violence. And work, in many instances in the past, I've worked with the family in order to try and bring about some kind of understanding, because one of the very, very, very vulnerable factors that are part of this right now in what I've seen from New Zealand and what I'm seeing right now in Australia is the visa status. A woman is brought in either as a spouse or as a co-spouse, or what, she's brought in a different role. And at this point, she's got no visa status at all. She's a visitor or she's a spouse visa. She hasn't got her own residency, nor is she a citizen. And that makes her extremely vulnerable. So she is easy sitting duck to be threatened by hiding her passport. The one in control, the male, usually hides her passport, or threatens her with deportation, or threatens her that he will take away the children because the rules allow him to. She has no status. She will be thrown out. So she keeps quiet. So it's very, very important to explore every aspect of what is happening. The factors I have mentioned are few. There are a whole range of other factors too. And as I said, it is like an onion which has to be peeled. Each time you peel an onion, you peel one part and then comes the next. And then you peel the second and they go on to more and more ones. It's never ending. So the support services basically that we provide is, once we receive a self-referral or we receive a referral from the police or from a community person, we assess what are the presenting issues. And the first step is always to ensure the safety of the victim. Make sure that he or she in most instances that I've worked in, she is safe. I know somebody asked me once, why is it that everything is about women? When 90% plus is women victims, where is the question of supporting men if we don't get the chance so easily at all? There is no such opportunity. So we are supporting women who are the victims. Once an assessment is done and we are very clear what the woman wants, because it has to come from her, what does she want from us? Because we are supporting her. And if she does want us to be involved, giving her some support in terms of legal support, helping her with police intervention if needed, counseling, which is telephone counseling. Sometimes women do not want to come face to face because body language, things when you're on a face-to-face level, sometimes you say things which you do not want other person to know. And very often women who belong to a particular community do not want their face to be known or them to be known by a person of their same communities. And coming to think of it, most migrants belong to small communities. They do not belong to a large population. It's a small community. So everybody almost knows everybody and they do not want to be known. So telephone counseling keeps your identity. Another big part is we also support them through the telephone because of the fact they are not sure. This whole concept of confidentiality in the Western world is something quite unknown or quite different from an ethnic perspective. When we say confidentiality is maintained from an ethnic perspective, the confidentiality is on few aspects, but I'll confidentially, generally what they think is, oh, confidentiality like back home when the neighbor will come to know and the neighbor will make eyes and tell the next person. And it's very easy for the whole community to be buzzing about what's happening in my family. And therefore I will rather keep it to myself than talk. Or maybe I can talk to an invisible person over the telephone. So we are open to telephone counseling too. Telephonically support the person in order to see how we can keep them safe, how we can empower them and work through all the issues that are presenting. There are times when I have also done face-to-face counseling, and part of the process is to empower her to see that there is a different step that she can take while still continue to build herself and to build the strength to either move away from there or to challenge the person or to challenge the larger family, the wider family. Court orders, we also support the woman through court orders if that is what she chooses to. Throughout the process, a member from Hamtum is continuously with the victim and supports the victim until the victim is safe and her safety is ensured. I think I have reached the end of what I have to say, and I think I've come to the time when I have to stop. Having worked so long, there's so much I can talk about, but thank you so much for the time, and thank you from the organization's part, Sankat Mochan Samiti. You can call us at any time. The numbers are given. Please do feel free to call if needed. Thank you so much for this, for listening to what I have to say.
Nirmala, that's how I say it correctly. You have such a huge job to do. There is so much of this trouble in the society, and with migrants and ethnic groups that come to a new country, their worlds have been turned around. So their roles and their understanding of what should be happening is very, very confusing. Besides the fact that the man has the power, and that's where you come in to protect those women. So thank you so much for doing this huge job. I congratulate you.
Thank you.